Okay. Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. I hope everyone could hear me. This is a sign that this is a real big tikkun because, we know when there's ikuvim, when there are manias, the sitrach is trying to stop something, and the sitrach only tries to stop good things. Only good things. Bad things, the sitracha lets go through. So obviously, this shiur must be kodesh kadoshim. I'm telling you because we've had over an hour long of technical glitches, and I'm using alternate equipment right now, and it's taken as a sign of that whenever there are manias, it's only because something really good's about to happen, and it's a last ditch effort from the sitracha to bar it. And one of the very good things that are going to happen that Mirz Hashem b'schus the shiur will be lirfuat shlema to Ya'akov ben Rina betושח Chol Yisrael. So really, it should be a schus Ya'akov ben Rina, and it should be good for all Klal Yisrael. Let me just tell you a story. Once we're talking about the eating of Menias and how the sitrach moves, because it's a big Musar Haskel. People wonder what's popular, what works, and if someone is very popular, or someone's very successful, if someone's getting all the followers, maybe he's the guy that we should follow also. The Hashgacha is smiling on him. No. Not in a world where the Hester Panim is dominant, in a world where, people think a boy could be a girl and a girl could be a boy, and in a world that thinks, that the Israel's the aggressor, when Israel's just the perpetual victim surrounded on seven sides, et cetera, et cetera. In a world that you have queers and transfegalach for Palestine, which is as Bibi said, it's like saying chicken for KFC, right? And that's considered to be normal and what intelligent people say. Okay, so in a world like that, where the Hester Purim sadly is dominant because we're in Golus, Hatzlacha is not a riot that Hashem is chafetz in anybody whatsoever. And let me tell you a story that I think is in this Megid Givul Psalm of Rav Michal Shorkin. He brings this story. I think that's where I saw it. I do believe that Rav Chaim Volozhiner, was besides being a big Rav of the Rav of Volozhin, Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin, he was a big Baal Chesed. Volozhin was not a particularly rich town, medium down. Listen, and even rich by the standards of pre-war Europe was, utter poverty by our standards. Right. I would say Somali refugees live better than they lived in Volozhin, but that's not saying much. They somehow have billions and billions of dollars. I got to open a Leering Center. Man, I got to open a Leering Center. Anyways, make the Evan should see a Leering Center and all my problems are solved. But anyways, so Volozhin, Volozhin is not exactly a place that was overflowing with money. Nowhere was in pre-war Europe. So a poor man used to come to town, he'd do his rounds, and then they go to the Rav finally, see if the Rav could make a donation. And Rav Chaim Volozhin, the Rachum V'chanu, and sometimes we'd hear a story and just say, that's it. What did you make so far? Only this one. Oh, we could do better. And he would go around with the guy, with the ani for a second round, get seconds, get doubles from all the people of Volozhin. Come on, you can give a little bit more. This guy really needs it. That was his kachu darko, and then it was very famous, that this is the routine. Go to Volozhin, go for your first round and do as best as you can. Then go to Reb Chaim, and if you could convince Reb Chaim Volozhin you had a valid cause, he himself will go around with you for doubles. Okay? So one guy comes to Volozhin, and he's got a sob story that's melting everyone's hearts. No one could be oimid b'fanav. And I actually had a similar case when I lived in Ramat Beit Shemesh to this story. A very similar case. A guy had a sob story that melted everyone's hearts. Everyone just turns the house upside down, right, to give him whatever they could find, any extra kopek that they had. Okay. So this guy, Mamash, he cleaned up in Volozhin even on his first round. because he had such a compelling, sad story. And then he's saving Rav Chaim Volozhner for last. Rav Chaim Volozhner with them will go back for even more doubles. All right. So he knocks on the door of Chaim Volozhner, gives him a piercing look, and says, "I heard about you. You're the guy that's melting everyone's hearts, huh? Yeah? Get out of my face. Get out of my face and leave town now." All right. And the guy got really scared, and didn't expect that type of talk, and he ran. But as much as that guy didn't know what hit him, and he ran, the people of Volozhin were just so mystified, stupefied. You understand it? This is Rav Chaim Volozhner. This is the Racham V'Chanun. That every Oni, no one ever got treated like this ever. And this guy who had the most compelling sob story, he should get this type of treatment. Right? Then the word gets out eventually. The guy was a big fake, right? None of it was true. And not only that, he was a Meshumad. He had converted to Christianity. He had previously converted to Christianity even before, masquerading as a pious Jew. And so the whole story was fake, and he was a Meshumad. And not only that, at the end of his, very successful fundraising campaign, he gave a large donation to the Russian church. All right. That's it. So everyone comes to Chaim Volozhner and says, "All right, we know you have we always knew you had Ruach HaKodesh. Now you can't deny it anymore. Can't deny it anymore. You're about Ruach HaKodesh." And he said, "No, Ruach HaKodesh, nothing. I got common sense." Right? Because when a real legitimate Ani comes to town, you guys, barely give. And why? Because the Yetzer Hara wants to stop you. The Yetzer Hara wants to stop you. Giving tzedakah is a big mitzvah. It's a mitzvah the Yetzer Hara wants to stop. Right? It's an amazing thing. I've heard it from a lot of Rosh Yeshiva that sometimes Gvirim admit to them, "Look, I spend so much money on the stupidest things. I don't know when I just can't bring myself to give you a big donation." Like sometimes the Gvirim themselves don't understand themselves. The honest ones, the ones that just will rationalize why they don't give, but the ones that they just can't understand it. I spend so much money on shtusim. Why do I find it so hard to give tzedakah? To give to a moiser? The answer is because the Yetzer Hara stops you. That's why I say Yetzer Hara stops you. It bars anything good. Here, the Yetzer Hara wasn't stopping you. This guy was clean out. The Yetzer Hara wasn't stopping you. I said it just can't be good. It just can't be good. The Yetzer Hara is not stopping anybody. Okay, can't be good. Yeah. And let that be a lesson to anybody that someone being wildly successful or being wildly popular, especially in this world of Hester Panim, where the Hanagav is Behester Panim, so long as we're in Gos, it's not a raya to anything. It's almost a raya to the exact opposite. Anyways, okay. Got a little bit to let off a little bit of my own personal beef over here on this. Okay, without further ado, and I really hope that the reception on this alternate equipment is going well. Let us talk about our topic that we advertised, from Sinai to Tzelem. Right, and like we said before, this shiur is lirfuas Ya'kov ben Rina betושח Yisrael. So, the obvious question should bother any thinking person is, where do we go from here? We're still burning off the cheesecake from Shavuos, whether you're hitting the treadmill or just using the injections. Injections are easier. Just get a doctor to write you a script that you're a diabetic and get the injections. It's just, anyways, but fine. We're still burning off the cheesecake, right? And, but let's talk about the spiritual cheesecake. Har Gavnunim, right? Maimed Ar Sinai, right? Which is somewhat alluded to. That's why we have cheesecake. Gvina Har Gavnunim. Anyway, so the Maimed Ar Sinai is the greatest revelation of divinity ever in history. Nothing like it before, nothing like it afterwards. Most amazing revelation. Matan Torah, Vayerd Hashem al Har Sinai, Hirchin el Yoinim al Tachtoinim. where do you go from here? Like what, you know, how do you, seemingly the only way to go from there is down. Like what this was the highest revelation. Am Yisrael is never as pure, never as holy. Right? Ani amarti Elokim atem, that's, by Maimer Asiri, so Shom Dar Sinai Paska Zua Masan, and seemingly it was only downhill from there. But it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case. It should be the case that, every time you hit a madrega, you progress from there to a higher madrega. But what's the higher madrega after Mama and Har Sinai? Right? That is the question that should bother any thinking person. Okay? Where do you go from here? Okay, so let's pose a halachic shaila. Okay, we know it's also to go on to Harabais, even Bisman Hazeh. And the Rambam says in Hilchos Beis Abchira, I do believe that's where it is, right at the beginning, that even though the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, Bisman Hazeh, sadly, according to the Rambam, right, it's only midrabanan, right, seemingly, right, the land is innately holy, but it's not, but its Kedusha is, as it were, called recessive, because it's revealed Kedusha. Its revealed Kedusha is because of Kibush. It was Mikoach us conquering it, right? And we lost control over it. So the Kibush that, revealed the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was bottle, right? Seemingly, right? So the kibush, right, is bottle, right, and so Kedushas Eretz Yisrael is, now behester, benister, like the land was always meant to be holy even before Am Yisrael conquered it. The kibush reveals the Kedusha, and the kibush was undone. Okay, but says the Rambam, not by Harabayis, because Harabayis, the Kedusha is because of the Shechina. The Shechina ain't a betela, right? The Kedushas Harabais is because the Shechina, appeared there, and the Shechina is not annulled. The kibush could be annulled, right? We lost control of the land. I don't want to get into politics now. Well, did we regain it now? I don't know. America could tell us pretty much what to do at any time. Yeah, okay, let's not get into this right now. Okay, our kibush now. We restored kibush. All right, let other people bash heads over that. But similarly, and the anhaga is to treat all the mitzvahs at Tzulis bar. It says only midrabanan bisman hazeh, sadly, but not so the isser of going up to Harabais, that we still treat it as a full-fledged isser kores to go up tamei to Harabais, because Shechina ain't a betela. The Kedushas Harabais is because the Shechina appeared there. Okay, that's why. Right? And the Shechina cannot be annulled. Kibush can be annulled, not the Shechina. Okay, so here's my question. If we knew where the real Har Sinai is now today, would it be osur to go up to Har Sinai? Yes or no? Of course not. Even in Doram Midbar, after Matan Torah, it's mutter to go up the mountain. And that was the greatest revelation of Shechina that there ever was. As awesome as, let's say, as the Shechina was in the Beis Hamikdash. Forget about Beis Hamikdash Sheni. Imagine even Beis Hamikdash Rishon, which had, the Nisim Niglim, but still nothing compared to the unbelievable, unmitigated divine revelation of Sinai. Vayered Hashem Har Sinai, mamish, biggest Gilui Shechina there ever was. Okay, right. So you should say it's seemingly Shechina in a betela, and should be also go up to Har Sinai forever, and it's not. Right, and I've been talking about that tourist trap that they take you to in what they call the Sinai Desert. If we knew where the real one was, it's not also to go up, right? Right, and and that's something which needs to be understood. Right? It's not also to go up to Har Sinai ever since Matan Torah ended. Why? Okay. So now the interestingly, where did it become usher? And we had to, and similar restrictions to Sinai were implemented there is in the Mishkan. So Shekhinah transferred to the Mishkan. But even in the Mishkan, it's not the same as Yerushalayim, because if I could go to any place where the Mishkan historically stood, right, it's not also to be there. So historically, the Mishkan was here. Let's say this is where the Mishkan was, in Shiloh, no, Givon, not also to go there, not also to stand there, go in there, Tamei Mace, not a problem. This was only on Harabayit, where we say Shechina Ina Betela. Well, what's the answer to that? Shechina Ina Betela, right? So it should mean every time there was Gilui Shechina. Now, let's not make a mistake. The Shechina really is everywhere all the time. Besod Va'ata Machayet Kulam, right? But we understand that we in halacha we don't treat it that way because the Shechina is hidden from our perception, right? But where the Shechina was revealed, that's where we have the halacha, where we have to treat Moira like Moira HaMikdash, right? Is where is Gilui Shechina, Moira Gadol Zu Gilui Shechina, right? Moira Gadol, and that's why you have to have Moira HaMikdash for the Gilui Shechina. Like Chazal say, Lo me'ah mikdash ata misyareh. We're not afraid of the mikdash, we're afraid of God, the Shechina that's in the mikdash, the one who commanded us, to have more mikdash. Right? So, what's the answer to that? So let me, discuss some concepts from Kabbalah, and we'll see how far we can get, because I also want to unpack a mysterious Rashi from Moshe Darshan, but we'll see if we get there. We'll see how we're doing for time. But to answer this general question, all right, about why do we have to say in Yerushalayim and Harabayis, that Shechina and Betela, there Shechina and Betela. Of course, the part of the answer lays in how the Torah always alluded to Yerushalayim in the future. The place Hashem will choose for His name to dwell. Okay, so even before we get Kabbalistic, let's just talk in the most mundane terms, right? Right, I could spill something, even something sticky, on a ultra smooth surface, and it'll just wash right off, right? Or I could pour something that's not sticky at all, like really pure water, on a towel, and it'll just be totally absorbed. Like the water will disappear into the towel, right? Whereas a very sticky substance, would just bounce off some Teflon, right? All right. So, what's the pshat, right? Certain things are capable of absorption. Certain things are not, right? There's and call it, for certain things have a kli kibul and certain things do not. Right, so they have the ability to absorb and certain things not. Right, the ability of absorption to be makabel, right? So you understand, right, that not all places, are equally capable of being makabel, right? When you want to talk about Shechina and Betel, we're now talking in the simplest pasha pshat before we get, go up into the stratosphere and talk, philosophically and even Kabbalistically. Right? Just this very simple yesod that's obvious from, life itself. Certain things have absorption capacity, certain things do not, right? You want to talk about Shechina Eina Betela, you have to talk about, that some Shechina was absorbed there. But, of course, if the Shechina appeared, none of it was absorbed, and then the Shechina disappeared, you can't tell, well, it should still be holy because Shechina Eina Betela. don't talk to me about Shechina and Betela if the Shechina wasn't absorbed. If you say that there was some absorption, then you say Shechina and Betela, right? If there was some type of absorption of the Shechina in, in the in where that Shechina appeared, okay, so Shechina and Betela, because of the aspect of Shechina that was absorbed. But if there was no absorption whatsoever, right? It's not a chisaron. It's the Shechina was batel. The Shechina appeared and the Shechina disappeared. None of the Shechina is being annulled. 100% of the Shechina that appeared, 100% of it has disappeared. You're not talking about Shechina being batel, that there's like Shechina that got annulled from its power, lost its power, right? It has to be absorbed. Now, let me give you a mashal, which will give away, it's what we alluded to in the whole title of this lecture, right? Let me give you a mashal, a very famous chazal that everyone quotes and everyone knows and everyone spews, especially when they hate somebody, as you'll hear in a second, but does anyone really think what it means? Think about this, right? Tzadikim b'misasan kruyim chayim, rishoyim afilu b'chayehem kruyim mason, right? Tzadikim, even when they're died, they're called alive, right? Even when they're dead, they're called alive. Rishoyim, even in their lifetime, are called dead. Which why the Rambam actually invokes this and takes it kind of literally. And I have a few rights that the Rambam took this very literally. They were not being poetic. There's something, that the Rambam says, it's in the Pirush HaMishnayos where he talks about, Tchias HaMesim, it's for the tzadikim. He says, because how could the Rishoyim come back to life if even in their lifetime they're kruyim mason? The Rambam Mamash took it seriously. And I'll explain to you how it's got to be poetic. The guy's heart is beating, right? Unfortunately, right? The guy's heart is beating, he's breathing, he's making money, wreaking havoc. How do you say? It's like he's Corey Mace, how do you say that? How do you say such a thing? Right? It's got to be poetic. And the Rambam actually took it quite literally. He said, how can you say that the Rishoyim, have Tchias HaMesim when even B'chayim, they're Kruyim Mason, right? And I'll prove to you the Rambam took it with this. By the way, what I'm telling you is a big yesod to understand, right? A Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva that the Ravid could not make sense of, right? Get there in a second, right? Because what are we really saying when we say tzadikim b'misasim kruyim chayim, rishoyim afilu b'chayehem kruyim mason? What are we really saying? We're not talking about biochemistry. We're not talking about, of course, this guy has his heart beating and that guy has his heart beating. They're both biochemically alive, right? But so is an animal, right? So is an animal, right? Biochemically alive, right? We're not talking about biochemical life. We're talking about spiritual life, that he has chibur to his nishmas chaim. Vayipach baba nishlam is, his soul that gives life. Now, you have to realize that now, years ago, I don't know if this might be, it's probably in my YouTube channel. You could find it. Find it on my YouTube channel or, find it on my website. We gave a series on Guf and Neshama, which we have to go back and complete. It was actually an excellent series, very, very chashva series, canceled for lack of interest on behalf of the brain dead populace. We'll just call them brain dead, but we won't say that they're B'chayim Kruyim Mason. Shem Yislach Lehem. Anyways, but it was a really good shiur, really excellent, a lot of groundbreaking research and a lot of yesodus in understanding Guf and Neshama, the chibur between the two. And basic lesson number one is you do not need a Neshama to facilitate biochemical life. Animals don't have a neshama, and they are biochemically alive, equally as biochemically alive as we are. And that's why if you kill an animal, basically anything with the exception of the white lice, whatever that is, the Kina Levana, right, which even some poskim say now with the microscopes, we see that they're also part of a rabba, you should be osir. But let's just go with the pshuto shalach, with the exception of the white lice. If you kill any of them on Shabbos, you're chayiv for netilas neshama. Neshama lav davka. Neshama just means life in that context, right? They're biochemically alive, right? And that's why you're chayav for killing them on Shabbos, right? You don't need a neshama to be biochemically alive. You need a neshama to be spiritually alive. That's why it's called Nishas Chaim Besod V'atem Hadveikim B'Hashem Elokechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. You're dabek in Hashem. How do we have dveikus in Hashem? Through our neshama. It's Besod Chelko Kamima, which again in our Yud Gimel Ikrim Shiur, we said that it should not be taken literally. It's not a piece of God. It just means it has a certain relationship with God. That is a whole and part relationship, which whole and part is a relationship. We spoke at great length. They have to think more abstractly of whole and part, like you are part of a family, right? You're not physically carved out of a family. You're a chelek of the kol is the family, and you're a chelek of that family. And that's what we mean by chelek kamimal. By the way, all we mean by that is that the neshamas of Klal Yisrael enjoy a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the part enjoys that type of relationship with the whole. We are all a part of the midah of called Knesset Yisrael, Malchus Tzilus, Kayadua, Shorish Nishamos Yisrael, which is also the midah called Shechina, and that's what we mean. It's a whole part relationship similar to being part of one big family. That's what that big family is called Knesset Yisrael, beside Malchus Tzilus, beside B'shachanti b'sochem. That's what it is. Okay, and right, but it's not a physical part. It's not like a piece of something. It's a part whole relationship. Okay, but it gives us a real relationship that's called dveikus. Right, dveikus. So the nishmas chaim is besod v'atem adveikim ba'Hashem Elokechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. We have this wonderful relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right, and that's real life. That's real life. That's called real life, right? So the tzaddik who got his guf to conform with his neshama. So neshama always has that sense of dveikus in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the tzaddik fights his yetzer. That's by the way, that is also a sign that needs to be cleared up. That it's not that the tzaddik doesn't have a Yetzirah and in Russia has a big Yetzirah. No, that is such baloney. The tzaddik fights his Yetzirah. The Russia does not. Right? This is a famous Gemara in Sukkah. The tzaddik is amazed how he overcame the great mountain, and the Russia is just appalled that he could even overcome the little hairbreadth, even the smallest taiva. The real difference between the tzaddik and Russia, the tzaddik is a fighter and is engaged in Mochemes HaYetzer. Right, and the Russia is not interested in fighting his taivas, right? Whatever. I'm not going to talk about what they say in the trans Hasidic movement. Most Rishoyim Yerkavu. Anyway, sorry. No more. Yeah, sorry, guys. I'm just not in a politically correct mood this morning. Anyways, so the tzaddik is a fighter, and he's kaifes yetzer, and he gets his guf to go along with his neshama, and that creates a bond between the guf and neshama. And there's something of the neshama left in the guf even after he's dead. That's that's the sort of havla de garme, the heat of the bones. The havla de garme is an aspect of the neshama that's left behind. V'shachbacha tishmar alecha, that's the havla de garmi, that keep the luz there, from which the whole body could regenerate, right? The tzaddik made a bond between his neshama and guf, so as the neshama really settled in the guf. They weren't at loggerheads with each other. And as a result, the guf mamish absorbed from the neshama. And there's an aspect of the neshama that stays with the body. This is all in the Zohar and Parshas Chayei Sarah. This is where you have all this whole sugya of how the neshama of a tzaddik cries over the guf and misses the guf and visits the guf in the kever. That's tzaddikim b'misasam kurim chayim. How's it with the Rishoyim? There's an unbelievable medrash Shochar Tov. It's in the Samachs. I can't remember. Is it Samach? Well, it's in the Samachs. I do believe there's a medrash Shochar Tov that talks about that by the Rishoyim. I mean, even by the normal people, the neshama said, the neshama has high demands and came down to earth. our kochachatanolet, we're born by force, right? Because the neshama didn't want to leave heaven because it's Kodesh Torah. The neshama wants to stay close to Hashem, where it's Kodesh and Torah. Doesn't want to get dirty. And so our kochachatanolet, the neshama was forced to come down, right, on a mission, and then even by regular people, right? The neshama, says. Sometimes, depending on how bad the guy is, even multiple times a day. By the Rishonim, probably once an hour. Shama says, "I've had it with this jerk. I'm leaving." And Riboshim has to intervene and show Malo Kola Aretz Kvoidai. Riboshim has to intervene and say, "Look how much Kvod Shemaim there is in this world." To reveal. Meaning, in heaven, you got no work to do. Look at what the potential of what there is to gain. Stick with it. Stick with the jerk a little bit longer. Try to make it work because there's so much Kvod Shemaim Megala here on earth. In heaven, you don't got no work to do. All the Kvod Shemaim has been revealed already. Look at all this Kvod Shemaim that could be revealed over here. You got work. Here you could accomplish. Here you could add to Malchus Shemaim. Right? So Rebbe has to intervene with that. And with sometimes it's like with Russia, it's like every 15 minutes. Has to intervene and convince the neshama to stick with the guy. Right? So the Russia, his neshama and his guf have no chibur whatsoever. So even in his lifetime, you can't even say there's any of the koach of the neshama in being absorbed in the guf. It's incarcerated. The neshama is incarcerated in the body of a Russia, right? The Russia's neshama is incarcerated in the body, but it's not mashpia to the body. None of it is absorbed in the body. The body is not gaining from the neshama the potential of immortality, which is the koach to ultimately be resurrected, right? And ultimately go to Olam Haba. The neshama ain't absorbing any of that from the neshama. The guf is not absorbing any of that from the neshama by a Russia who conducts himself that way, that his body does not follow the neshama. So the body's not absorbing from the neshama, right? So, So you have two people that technically have a Tzelem Elokim. They were born with that potential. It's not actualized. I'm telling you, we're not going to get to that with Moshe Darsh. We'll have to save it for a special session. But because this yesod that this most preliminary yesod is taking longer for me to explain than I expected. So two people have the potential to be Tzelem. I should say that the Tzelem is in potential, not in actual. And this is a little bit of a key to understand Rav Moshe Darshan, right? So everyone's born with the potential to be a Tzelem Elokim. And that's what Tzelem Elokim means. Tzelem Elokim, right? Actually, the Tzelem is not the body per se and not the guf per se. Sometimes we talk about them in relative terms, calling one the Tzelem and the other one the Demus. In relative terms to differentiate, but both of them have the potential. But the actual Tzelem is the integration of body and soul. That's the Tzelem Elokim, the integration, right? Now, what's unique about the human body, as the Rambam points out in Shemona Prakim, and everyone will tell you this, no one disagrees, right? Only the human body has the potential to absorb a neshama, right? So a human body, so let's say a person is punished, right? Punished, that his soul, say call it Gilgal, and it's not Gilgal in the literal sense. As the Ramchal makes this point in the Ma'amar HaChochma. You'll see, Kisvei Ari and in the Mekubalim, for this oynish you're mitgalgel in a parah, and for this oynish you're mitgalgel in this animal, and this oynish you get stuck in a stone or in a tree. We will, if the Ariya Kodesh says it, no one denies it. Once the Ariya Kodesh, appeared on the scene, don't ask me if you're not because if you deny this. Okay, I'm not going to paskin that shaila, but it is very wise that if the Ariya Kodesh writes it, you have all, if the Beis Yosef, who was much older than him, and he recognized Godador was mavat himself to the Ari, we could do so also. Okay? As Rav Yaakov Weinberg once told me, halachically speaking, there's nothing in Kisvei Ari you can't argue with. But it would be very unwise to do so. That's what he told me. Right? Al pi halacha you can argue, because, he's only as good as his raya, lo bashamayim, right? But it would be very unwise to do so. And then he extends and he whispered, you do not know enough to argue on the Arizal. Okay, okay. So we were just talking about in principle, all of Kiseri's divrei Torah that one could say Torah v'lemod on Yitzarech, and the Goyen argued on the Arizal, because he understood the primary sources in the Zohar differently. All right, but the Goyen, that's the Goyen, right? And the Goyen did not argue on this principle of Gilgal, but the point I want to make, a very important point that has to be understood, right? That must be understood, and the Ramchal makes this point in the Ma'amar Chachma, like I said, right? That we use the term Gilgal very widely, and we don't always mean it the same way all the time, right? Right, there's Gilgal where that neshama literally gets absorbed in that body and becomes another person. This neshama, has multiple identities to it, and what happens by Tchias HaMesim? Short answer is all incarnations worthy of Tchias HaMesim will have them, and it's fine. The neshama could animate and be related to multiple bodies at the same time because it's not physical. It doesn't take up, not confined in space. So yeah, that's the short answer. But of course, there are a lot of details to this. But there's Gilgal where a neshama really was, inhabited this body and had this identity, and subsequently inhabited another body, human body. And had that identity, and then they had multiple identities. Each one has its account in Shemaim of Schar V'Einish and Chelik L'Olam Haba. Right, but then there's when the neshama did not really become a different entity; it was just incarcerated. So when a neshama is, what we say, it's nisgalgo b'para, is nisgalgo b'kelev, or whatever, it doesn't become one with that entity. It doesn't have the type of neshama and guf relationship that has with a Jewish body. Right, it does not have that same relationship. Right, it is just in jail there. The neshama won't put any koach into that cow, that the cow will have tchias hamesim and the cow will go to olam haba. Right, so nothing of that neshama is absorbed there. The neshama does not have a fulfilling life there as a cow. Right, cows I think have a very simple, straightforward life. They just got to stop feeding it so much corn and let it just graze freely, and then its life will be perfect. Okay, it's all that genetically modified food that they force on it, those hormones. Okay, but otherwise they have a pretty good life. What Chazal say? Ma elu shenivru shamsheni, and their nizam. I'm paraphrasing. Their nizam below Torah. Right. Oh, they're supposedly here to serve me. They don't have parnasa problems. They don't pay taxes, right? Man, they don't have to deal with. Well, I'll stop here. They have far less complicated lives. Right? We've sinned, and that's why our parnasa is just so cut down and so hard and so difficult. Right? But anyway, let's get back to the point. Right? The neshama that's we say it's nizgago, so as Ramchal says, it's not Gilgal in the same way. It is incarcerated there. It's just jail. It's jail, and the neshama is in tremendous tsar. The neshama won't get any nachas, even if it's the cow will be a good cow and perform its function for which was created. The neshama won't get any nachas from it. The neshama won't put any koach into it. The neshama is purely in jail. Okay, and then also that cow is not going to absorb any koach from the neshama, incarcerated in it. There's no shaychus whatsoever. It's just pure incarceration, and it certainly is true if the neshama was stuck in a tree or stuck in a rock. Kievin mikir tizak. It's a kisvei. The pasuk Kievin mikir tizak. A stone in the wall is crying out. It's talking about the neshama that's stuck there. Confined there, incarcerated. It's incarceration. There's no integration. It's incarceration, not integration. Right? And that's the beauty of a Tzelem Elokim, right? And just like the Tzelem Elokim is that there could be integration between the neshama and God, and neshama of a yid could tap into Torah, right? So, hence, the or HaTorah could have integration first of all, with the Adam himself, with the Adam himself, and that's so you're called a Ben Torah, a Ben Torah. And you have the koach of Torah inside of you. And I'll tell you how far this goes. Halacha l'maaseh, hizaru b'tamid chacham, sheshachach talmudo, sheluchos v'shivrei luchos munachim ba'arayin. Right? You have to have cover for a Talmid Chacham that forgot his learning. Why? I'll be mechabed him so long as he knows his learning. Right? He forgot his learning. You know, what makes the difference between me and him? No. Because he's just like the Shivrei Luchos Ar Kodesh and their Munach Ba'aron. You know, the Torah integrates with the Yid and becomes a part of him. Integrates and becomes a part of him. Lo'olam void, like a Davar Kadosh that sadly got torn. The Kedusha is not bottled. Or HaTorah, right, integrates with the Adam, right, the Yid, of course. We're talking about the Yid, right? Our neshama is mesugal for Torah, and through our neshama, we're mamshech the Or HaTorah into the guf. It's an important point. You don't really learn Torah with your brain. Your brain is the makabel, you know, that gets transmission. You learn Torah with your neshama. I see this shiur is just it will be a schus for Yaakov ben Rina. It's branching out into a lot of wonderful inyanim, right? But you understand. Right, you understand that the neshama taps into our Torah, and just like the neshama integrates with the Yiddish neshama integrates with the Yiddish guf, right? So also the Or HaTorah integrates. That's part of the Tzelem. Integrates, becomes one with the body, and therefore you have the Talmid Chacham Shach Talmudo has Kedushas HaTorah inside of him, right? So if he's not, because sadly, the biochemical brain doesn't work anymore the way it used to, but he absorbed Kedushas HaTorah. So you have to give him covered HaTorah, right? Nifla ma'aid, right? It's the integration, right? It is that's why, and then I think I gave it away from Sinai to Tzelem, right? That is the progression, right? That is, how that is the advancement, of what Matan Torah, the next step after Matan Torah, right? Sinai was Megala Torah, but it did not have the inner absorption. Now I'll give you a very good mashal to understand this, right? It's the difference between erusin and nesuin, right? Marriage, which is bondage, it's, and it's not by no coincidence. Zachu shchina shruya b'nem. Have mamash the shchina between them. Right, but there's this erusin where you made the woman asra kol yama kehegdish, but she's not mutter to you either, right? You just separated her from the rest of the world, right? But she still needs chuppah and kiddushin to be mutter to you, and then you have intimacy. It's called sheiro akrova ela, right? After nesuin, right? After nesuin, right? Then the two of you are integrated. Integration, and the integration between man and wife, it says in that Zohar that we mentioned before in Parshas Chaye Sarah, is besod the integration of neshama and guf, the righteous neshama that says everything that of course happened kipshuto in Parshas Chaye Sarah. Avram is also meramis on the neshama, because they're just like Avram, cried for Sarah. By her levai, that's the neshama of tzaddik cries for the guf of the tzaddik. So that's Avram is also, it's kipshuta, but it's also a mashal for the neshama. And the guf of the tzaddik, kedain Sarah ikri. The guf of a tzaddik is called Sarah. And the union between Avram and Sarah is ma'ash beso, the union of ish ve'isha. Neshama comes from the world olam ha'elyon, which was nivra b'yud, and hence the yud of ish. And the guf, the isha, the guf comes from olam hazeh. That was nivra behei, and that's the hay of isha, and together they make shem Hashem, and that's the integration, and that's the shechina. The function of shechina is for integration, right? Integration. That's v'shachanti b'socham shechina shruya beinayim. It's mamish the zivug of zachar and nekevas beside neshama and guf, right? And it's beside Knesset and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because there's the micro Tzelem, which is me and you. I mean, halavai, me and you. Oh God, halavai, right? We have to live up to that. right? The Adam has his own private Tzelem, but the Adam's Tzelem is only not a complete Tzelem because he needs his better half, right? His wife. He's only plag gufa, is only half body, but it's very meduik. Plag gufa, ishto kegufo. His guf aspect is not complete until he has his wife because the integrate unit. He's the neshama, she's the guf. Besod ishto kegufo. He's plag gufa, right? Isha kshera oisa ratzon ba. Let's be real chauvinistic. Why not? So Isha kshera oisa ratzon ba. He's the ratzon, and she, which is the neshama, and she's the asiya. That's the guf. Isha kshera oisa ratzon bala. Right, so the complete Tzelem, which is why we make the bracha Yotzera Adam Asher Yotzera Adam B'Tzelem by marriage. The Tzelem is complete, right, and that's the simcha. That's a sort of panim chadashos that you want to have because you're celebrating the completeness of the Tzelem, right? Kayadua, that's by the Shivas Yemei HaMishta of the Nesuin, right? So you have the intimacy. So of course, Matan Torah already gave us what's called in Kabbalah or makif, a surrounding light. It's not integrated, surround us, but it surrounds us and it makes a difference. Just like Erusin, she's not intimate with the husband yet, but there's an or makif, she's asra kol yama character, she's separated us. Hashem separated us from all of mankind with Matan Torah. The sod or makif, the sod Erusin. Morosha, out to create Morosha, ela ma'oirasa. Every lashon of that chazal is meduik, that the Matan Torah made us beside Erusin. Matan Torah alone separated us from all the other nations of the world. And it's a protective wall, but it's a wall around us. So it's a protective wall. It's a separating wall. Yes, build the wall, right? Got to enforce our borders, right? So build the wall and enforce the wall. We have to be separate. We got to keep the alien out, and it's also protective. It has a double function. The Torah protects us, even if we're not, sadly, we're not keeping it properly. Just it protects us that HaKadosh will never exchange us for another nation. We'll always be different, and HaKadosh will always stick with us. Always. And that also came from Matan Torah. That's a famous Maharal. He used to give us a din of Anusa, lo yechol l'shalcha kol yamav. So imagine a marriage like that. He can't divorce her ever, but what's the intimacy that if you living with a guy that, whatever. But, the point is the principle, of that we are permanently separated from Yumas Olam and permanently protected from them because he's not going to abandon us and exchange us for them. But that's all beside or makif, a surrounding light. It's not integrated yet, right? And it's a lot of Torah still or makif because it's infinite and we're having new chidushei Torah, but not because Torah wasn't given. They have new chidushei Torah in every door. Does that mean the entirety of Torah has not been given yet? No, it's all been given, but it was stacked up around Am Yisrael besod or makif. And the new chidushim that come out is that every generation is mafnim, internalizes another aspect of the or. Integrates. And that's the chidushei Torah that come out from the Chachmei Yisrael. It's a new level of it's a gilui that comes because of the integration. So that's what we mean. Matan Torah never stopped, and yet it's Chag Matan Torah Seidu. So like, how do you, that there's Chag Matan Torah Seidu, which is only once a year, commemorated once a year as if it was a one-time event. And yet, we make a bracha noisein ha-Torah in present tense, which the Maharal says because Torah is infinite, it's constantly being given. Couldn't be given. Answer is they're both true, right? It's constantly being mushba because the process that hasn't finished yet. What ended in one grand moment was the or makif. It was gifted to us and it now surrounds us, but it's still called giving because we're still receiving. So it's still being given and still being mushpa, right? Because it needs to be integrated, right? But so that it was granted to us and it surrounds us, and it's makif us, and it separates us from the Yumas Olam and puts us in a whole different separate dimension, right? That's Matan Torah, Chag Matan Torah Seidu. But what's Noisei Na Torah, it's as if Hashem is still giving, and he is mashpia to us because he has to facilitate the integration. Right, and that's what's happening ever since. That's the new chidushei Torah. It was all niskala to Moshe. I feel Masha Talmud Vasek Shoel Larabo, right? But then and it was all makif around Am Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu calls it as or makif. The or pnimi is, how it appears integrated in our heads. In every door and door, there's a new level of the internalization of Torah, which it builds our Tzelem, it builds the Tzelem of a nation, because even if our earlier generations, they completed their Tzelem, but Am Yisrael has a macro Tzelem that encompasses all generations. And you want to look, what does the macro Tzelem of Am Yisrael look like? If you could stack up all the generations together, some generations are connected to Rosh, to Dordeya. The last generations are the heels, right? Besod ikvasa de Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, the heels. If you would stack up all the generations together, who does it look like? Yaakov Avinu. And that's the sod, Yaakov Avinu, Lames, Mazar B'chaim, Afu B'chaim, right? It will all look like one big Yaakov Avinu. That Muscha, Yaakov, Chakuka, B'kitz, Yaakov. And that's so Mazar B'chaim, Afu B'chaim. Yaakov Avinu is the main shufrei to Adam Rishon. He has the perfect Tzelem, and all the generations of Am Yisrael together added to one macro Yaakov Avinu, and that should also be a schus for Refuah, Yaakov, Ben, Rina. All right, and that's the theme of Parshas Naso. The theme of Parshas Naso is the integration. So let me buy it. There's like you see integrated crucial from the din of, first and foremost by the Mishkan. The Mishkan and the Chanukah Sanasiyim. But of course, there are other things in the parsha that I show it, like, the end of, that sota, that the shame is nimchak, to make shalom between ish and isha. That's why it's so chashuv to make shalom bias, because the integration of the Shechina in every Jewish home, and the Kedushas Nazir shows Kedusha settling in the human being. But of course, the Hashras HaShechina, Chanukah Sabayis, the end of Chanukah is not is to make the or be misyashiv in Kalim, to internalize the or of Sinai. And that's where we go. We go from Sinai to Tzelem, right? That, the job to go from Matan Torah is to work on integration into ourselves, and through ourselves, integration into the world. And how you integrate it into the world? Not all of the world can equally receive Am Yisrael's hashpah. That's the end of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael Bechlal and Har HaBayis Befrat. That's the land that could absorb from Am Yisrael what Am Yisrael absorbed from the Torah. And that's beside Ma'alma of the Eretz Al-Avzam Es Torasi, right? Eretz Yisrael got smaller after Chorban HaBayis. Like the Gemara Gittin says, Bizman Yoshvei Aleh, it's very wide. And where was there always like extra space in Kosh Kadoshim? Because the Oron is there. Oron Eno Min Amida. Eretz Yisrael could absorb Ruchnius, right? And gain extra space from the Ruchni dimensions. Chutz La'aretz can't do that. And that's why, Am Yisrael needs to be in Eretz Yisrael, because if we want to put Kedusha into Olam Hazeh in a way that it will be absorbed, not just appear temporarily while we're in town. And when we leave town, so Pana Haida, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara, right? And it leaves a Roshem, but only a Roshem. But most of it is nostalgic, where it's absorbed and, is in Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael, but of course, we have a neshama guf relationship with the land. We have to absorb, the Ora Torah into our guf, and from our guf, it goes into Eretz Yisrael, and only Eretz Yisrael is capable of absorbing it, and the absorption capabilities of Har HaBayis are even greater than that of Eretz Yisrael. And that's what they say for Ora Chachma, from a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. It's excellent sefer, very deep, very machshavadik. In Parshas Re'eh, it says, Chutz is called Chutz La'aretz B'lashon Chetzi. It's only half a land, because it's only Gashmis without Ruchnius. Eretz Yisrael, so that's Chutz La'aretz, Chetzi Oretz. Eretz Yisrael could absorb Kedusha Satorah, Mamish absorb it, and that's what the side that extra space opens up. Right? So that's our, so we could say that, from Sinai to Tzelem, and from Tzelem to Mashiach, who completes the Tzelem. Adam is Rosh Hashanah, Adam, David, Mashiach, and that's in Eretz Yisrael, and that's where the absorption is complete, right? Sinai, separated us gave us Or Makiv. The Or Pnimi is in Yerushalayim, Ki Mitzion Teitzei Seira, right? And it's all beside the of Tzelem, of integrating the Kedusha, integrating the Neshama with the Guf, integrating Kedushas HaTorah into Olam Hazeh, into Gashmias. The macro Tzelem is the Mishkan, or the Beis HaMikdash, which Kayadua, from the Medrash and from the Zohar, and Nefesh Chaim talks about it. The Mamash, you could make parallels between, the Rishonim talk about also, make parallels between the Tzuras HaMishkan and the Tzura of the Tzelem. There's the Guf of the Mishkan, there's the Shechina that fills it, like a Neshama fills a Guf. So the macro Tzelem, which we need, because we're kind of tainted, We can't have v'shachanti b'socham literally yet. So it has to be in the Mishkan. That's like the pure, sterile Tzelem. It's the macro Tzelem of Am Yisrael. So that's the macro Tzelem. There's the micro Tzelem of the ancient of everyone's has. Loslo, when our Tzelem will be cleaned up, it will be mamish. The Sukkah ben Yecheskel say the Ikar Shechina will be in Klal Yisrael. There'll still be a Makom Avoda. All right, but right now the Ikar Shechina is in the Makom HaMikdash because that's the pure Tzelem. Right, until we could be worthy of v'shachanti b'socham literally, b'meira b'yameinu. Right, so it's all about that's in of Chanukas HaMishkan is the internalization of the light, and that's we said it's like nesuin relative to Erusin. That's we could say al derech hatzachus, al derech hamlitza noso miloshin nesuin. Matan Torah that we just had was besod Erusin. Morasha, Ma'orasa, Kilas Ya'akov, and Parshas Naso's Nisuin. It's all about internalizing the light. Going from Chayle Oraisa to Chayle Mashkina in the Lashon Hazar, right? There are soldiers of the Torah, but there are soldiers of the Mishkan that are befrat connected the idea of the internalization. And that's what chinuch is all about, as the Chovos HaTalmidim says in my mental chinuch, as in Chanukas Habayis, as opposed to limud. Chinuch is internalization. Chanoch lenar. Al pidarko gam ki yaske, because if you had chinuch, which is they internalize the Torah, then gam ki yaskin lo yasar iman. Even when he grows old, he will never stray. Right? That's the difference between chinuch and limud. Chinuch is which is Chanukah Sanasiyah. Chanukah is the internalization of the light. That is where we go from Sinai. As we said, it also in the where do we go from Sinai? We go inward. That's where we go. Where do we go from Sinai? We go inward. From Sinai to Tzelem. The avoda is, the progression is, if there's new or makif that we get every year by Shavuos, the avoda after Shavuos is working on internalizing and integrating it. And, all right, all this should be a schus refuah shem of Yaakov ben Rina betושח. So everyone have a wonderful Shabbos.